I've been playing a lot of Fortnite recently, but before Fortnite I played a lot of Battlegrounds, just like a lot of us did, and still do in fact. Of course, with the new desert map that's come out and updates that PUBG has had, it's kind of revitalised my energy for the game and I've been playing it a lot more. Fortnite has somewhat ruined my Battlegrounds experience in certain ways though, if I'm completely honest, and here's why. When I play a game of Fortnite, the games are snappy, they're quick, you're in a lobby for only moments before a game starts, and then you're in the bus and on the ground instantly into action. There tends to be very little downtime where you don't at least see other players and get into fights and engagements. The map itself is relatively small, but it never feels too crowded either. And then we've got PUBG. Both maps in this game are huge. If you've been playing the test serve, you'll have had a chance to play the new desert map like I just mentioned, and I'll get onto some specifics on it in a minute, but the map is just as large as the first one with added verticality. The main problem I have with Battlegrounds at the moment is the amount of downtime that you have. I've played a lot of squad games recently with a few friends, and the amount of downtime we had was quite comical in parts. We spent more time walking around boxing rings, casinos and goofing around on cars than we actually did fighting other players, and not for lack of trying either. Sure, there's nothing wrong with finding your own fun in a map like this, but when the novelty of the new map wears off, you're relying on the gameplay and gunfights to keep you entertained. And I just feel that more often than not in PUBG, especially on the new map, the game just doesn't give you enough of them. In first person mode, I find the game and gunfights very rewarding. Taking down another squad, for instance, is still a great feeling. It just doesn't happen enough. There's a reason that Battlegrounds has an auto run key and Fortnite doesn't. Battlegrounds actually needs one. But to clear one thing up before we get into the nitty gritty, this isn't a "is Fortnite a better game than Battlegrounds" video. I genuinely love both games. They both have their positives and negatives, even if Fortnite is more of my cup of tea right now. I've spent a lot of time playing Battlegrounds and I love what it has to offer. That being said, I think it needs to do some things differently if it's going to keep me coming back, rather than jumping into the instant action of a game like Fortnite. In the time it takes to play one game of Battlegrounds and potentially run for 20 minutes without seeing anyone, I could actually win one game of Fortnite and be in a second one. Even if you die, you can get into a new game almost instantly. And this got me thinking, what can Battlegrounds do to improve this? Do you think it even needs improvement? I personally do, but of course some people would argue that it's just fine the way it is, and that's okay. I just know that from a gamer's perspective, I find running for 20 minutes just to be shot in the back a bit much. Don't get me wrong, and I know what you're thinking. Not all games are like that. I've had ones with plenty of action, but I'd say that there are a much smaller percentage of those, and of course I could just drop Millbase or Picardo every time and have a 50-50 chance of coming out alive, but I don't feel like the game should be like that. I think the main issue is the map, and the biggest issue is on the desert map. It's just too big, in my opinion, for the amount of players, and there's too many large cities with tons of buildings to explore and loot. I think that you could have 200 players on a map like the desert map and it wouldn't feel too crowded, especially when a lot of players die at the start and the AFK problem, which still exists. 200 players, of course, it just isn't realistic, especially when you consider that the game already struggles with 100 players and early game is marred with rubber banding, a lot of the time making engagements quite frustrating, and then you've got the performance angle, the frames per second. That's also one reason why bunching players up could cause problems. I actually wonder if the game could handle it though. So how about this idea? What about keeping the entire map, but each game only uses a randomly selected section of it? Say just over a half or 2/3 of the map is available for each game, and it's different every time. The plane flies over the available area and the rest of the map is already in the electric. This way you keep all of the original map elements, but you also create a smaller playing field which can hopefully create a bit more action throughout the whole period of the game. Now I like this idea because the other solutions are creating a faster zone or giving less time for players and constantly pushing them forward, and I think that's a bit more of a frustrating gameplay experience, always running from the circle, especially if you're left without a vehicle. I actually think that a lot of the built up areas on the desert map could be moved closer towards each other as well. There's a lot of empty space on both of the maps, to be honest, and I think that they could be easily shrunk down to bring players a bit closer together more often. Now specifically with the desert map, this is just a bit of a tricky one for me because I've been waiting for a new map for a very long time, like we all have, and then it's arrived and well, you know what? I don't like it. I know that sounds crazy, but let me elaborate. Visually, I think it's fantastic and I love all of the new assets. There's a ton of detail in it. I mentioned it before. There are casinos, boxing rings, new shops, new houses, graveyards, crashed planes. There's a lot to love about the new map. Not least is the frames per second. It's far, far better than any performance on the vanilla map that I've ever seen. Creating the map from scratch with performance in mind really has made a huge difference. The main difference between this map and the original is that there's far more built up areas and far more verticality, which means more hiding spots than ever before. There are single floor buildings all the way up to a 5-story building. So many nooks and crannies and places to hide that you'd just never be discovered in. The map is really promoting a camping gameplay style in my opinion, and the amount of players that can shoot you from almost any angle that you can see is overwhelming. I played a number of games and I found that when heading into a built up area, there were just so many angles to cover that it became quite frustrating. Now I know that this is meant to be a realistic tactical game, but I found that working into a built up area is just more frustrating than rewarding. That's my thoughts on it, and while I do think it's visually a great map, it's left me with more frustration than joy. And you could say, well, a smart player would just avoid those built up areas and stick to the outskirts, but that's quite boring in my opinion. And sometimes you're going to be forced into the built up areas because of the circle. It's just inevitable that that's going to happen. On the flip side, of course, the more that you play the map, you'll learn a lot more of the angles, but I just think that there's so many angles of exposure to cover that the game is going to become even more RNG than it currently is. And that's quite frustrating for someone who plays the game a lot and wants to feel that they're improving and getting better, but with so many random elements in the game, you're really going to be held back. And for the competitive scene and esports side of PUBG, which is definitely a key component of this game, that's going to be a big issue. Of course, I'm playing devil's advocate here, and the new map has only just been released, so time will tell how the meta of it all changes, and I have definitely had some great experiences on the new map already. But I think in gameplay terms, I actually preferred the first map, Erangel, to the new map, the desert. The first map is a much better video game level in my opinion, in terms of how many cities there are and how many built up areas and angles you have to cover at any one time, and also the frequency and amount of fights that you can get in throughout the game. Whereas it seems to me like the new map is much more like a realistic place that could potentially exist in real life, but that doesn't technically translate that well to a gameplay perspective. For the average Joe, I reckon on this map, like 80% of your deaths are going to be from someone who's in a window in a built up area looking at you as you try and run in or run around or run through because the circle is forcing you to go there, or you just maybe need some loot. Too many built up areas, too many large cities, too many floors in the buildings, too many windows. I think the whole map just needs simplifying a bit. On the flip side, I have friends and I have other people I play with all the time who absolutely love the new map and love the way that it plays, and that's fine. I just feel like the complexity of the map and the size is really going to add to the problem of those long stretches of, 15-20 minutes where you're just running and you don't run into any players or any squads. And to be honest with you, that's kind of boring gameplay. I'm really interested though to get others' thoughts on Battlegrounds and the general speed of the game. Do other people feel like there's too much downtime in this game? Are you running too far and getting sick of it? Do you think it's just right and it doesn't need changing at all? From my perspective, I don't want this to turn into a complete intense action game like Fortnite, but I do think the game could benefit from less running and less downtime between gunfights. Perhaps further down the line, we could have several different game modes where the circles move at different speeds, or it's just certain areas of the map, or there's more players or less players and the game just runs a bit quicker. And that's a cool proposition for me, giving players more choice, and if they want a more action-packed game overall, then that option could be there for them. So there we have it guys, could be a really interesting discussion down in the comments below here. How do you feel about the pace of Battlegrounds right now, the first map and the second map? If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, a thumbs down. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.